Good evening. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, California, and welcome to the Forum Online. Sports don't exist in a vacuum. Injustice and inequity are reflected and reinforced in sports as they are in all areas of our society. And sport has long served as an arena for the struggle of racial justice. Athletes such as Tommie Smith and John Carlos to Colin Kaepernick have served as powerful agents for change. But even many of their fans continue to be uncomfortable about their protests on the podium at Olympic medal ceremonies or on the field during the National Anthem. What does the activism of athletes and our reception of it tell us about who we are? My guest tonight is Dr. Harry Edwards. He has had an outsized influence over the history, culture, and understanding of the role of sports in society. Professor at UC Berkeley for 30 years, he invented a field of study, the sociology of sports, and provided the foundation for all of its assertions. He is the lead organizer behind the Olympic Project for Human Rights, which led to the most widely recognized protest in sports history when American sprinters Tommie Smith and John Carlos raised Black Power salutes atop the Olympic medal stand in Mexico City in 1968. Beginning in the mid-1980s, Dr. Edwards began consulting on issues of diversity for the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball. He arranged seminars on finances and social interactions and essentially invented the modern system of player counseling and support. Each year, the cathedral chooses a theme for inspiration and reflection, and in 2021, our theme is healing. We'll be talking tonight about sports, athletes, and how they play a role in healing racial injustice and inequity. Professor Edwards, thank you very much for joining me. And usually there's like a little bit of time in the green room where we talk a little bit, but I needed to warn you that I'm one of your students. And not only am I one of your students, but I preached a sermon about you, I was reading your autobiography, so everything was Dr. Harry Edwards for like 2 weeks straight. And just preaching that sermon, 5 other students came forward to me after church and told me about the impact that you had on their life. So I want to thank you. Education is wasted on the youth. And I knew when I was in your class, I was getting a lot, but the longer the years pass, the more I understand exactly how fortunate I was to have you as my teacher.
Oh, thank you so much. Nothing gives joy to an old teacher like a student who comes through and says, I'm not a victim, I'm a beneficiary of having been in your class.
Love that. Yes. What I loved about your autobiography is you named all your elementary school teachers. I mean, that to honor them in that way, I was so there. Your autobiography is one of my favorite books that I've read in the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, maybe. It was so moving in so many points. And it's just like a little thing like that. It speaks volumes about how important education is and what it can do for us.
Oh, absolutely. I've always felt that teaching is the greatest of all professions, because unlike architecture or engineering or dentistry or being a medical doctor or something of that character who do something for somebody, a teacher inspires people to learn and incites them to think so that they can do for themselves. And that's the greatest gift that you will ever be able to bestow upon anyone. So I've always taken my teaching as my number one calling, not job, but a calling.
It is a vocation. It is a calling. And you're so right about helping people to be the best self they can be. It's Soren Kierkegaard writes about the difference between he writes about the difference between Socrates and Jesus. And it is about being able to help that person be fully alive, fully the best they can be.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and there's no, but the differences are artificial fences between teachers and preachers when you really come down to it. I've learned in my old age, I've come to the position that a faith is as important as science, and when you it's like the old Black gospel song. Faith got me up this morning, and faith carries me through the day. We know one day we're going to get up and put our shoes on, and the coroner is going to take them off of us. And it's a sheer act of faith that we say, but not today. And so we set schedules and we make plans and agendas and everything, but that's an act of pure faith. And it's important as anything that we ever created in terms of technology and science.
I completely agree with you. I mean, one of the things that I learned about in your class is something every year I've come to appreciate more and more. It is just the role that sport can play in the movement to attain human dignity. It's like a revolutionary idea. And I had no idea how close you were to the origin of that moment. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the Olympic Project for Human Rights and how it came into being, and then how it's had a life of its own since then. I mean, from that point in 1968 at Mexico City, all the way to Colin Kaepernick, just a few years ago.
Picking up a little bit, I kind of lost your sound.
Yeah, I can hear you now. So just about the Olympic Project for Human Rights, like how did that come into being? And then how has that idea evolved?
Well, when I was at Cornell University, I had to convince my committee to write on the sociology of sport. They thought, well, this is just an old jock who doesn't know anything else to do, so he wants to bamboozle us with some treatise on sport and society. I said, yeah, sport is a critical institution. And point of fact, I was convinced even at that time that sport is so important. People have such an investment in it that you can actually change society and institutional functioning, human relationships, by changing people's perceptions and understandings of the games they play. And so one of the things that I set out to do while I was writing my dissertation is to become not just involved in the intellectual analysis of sport at the intersection of society, but actually to look and see how we could actually impact developments in society at one of the most tumultuous times in the history of this country, the 1960s. So one of the things I did was to organize a protest at San Jose State over the circumstances of athletes and Black students there. And then from there, it became a natural progression to look at the Olympics because there was basically a corporate interspersed directorship between the NC2A and the Olympic Committee. So we began to look at those issues. And of course, that's where the Olympic Project for Human Rights evolved and developed. And in the end, it not only impacted how we looked at sport and society in America, but we had case of Nelson Mandela, bringing in the posters that we developed in support of the anti-apartheid movement, as well as a photo of Smith and Carlos on the podium. And he actually taught other prisoners on Robben Island using that OPHR example and said, this is what we're going to do. Sports is going to model the society that we want to have in South Africa. And he actually, rather than banning the Springbok rugby team, he expanded the Springbok rugby team to make it more inclusive and said, this is going to be the model that we're going to use to develop South African society. And he put a tremendous amount of energy into that and gave it credit for avoiding a bloodbath in South Africa with the demise of apartheid. So all the way along the line, the theories and so forth that I had developed turned out to be correct. And of course, you have to follow up with that. And out of this also came the sociology of sport, the first integrated textbook in that discipline. And so over a half a century later, we're still talking about that movement.
We are, and it still is bearing fruit. I do think of Colin Kaepernick, and I wonder if you can talk just a little bit about, his experience, the president of the United States denouncing him. I mean, I just think of you too. I mean, there you are. I read the FBI files that are interspersed in your autobiography. I mean, it's just, there's so many horrifying things in there. And then 10 years later, President Carter is talking about boycotting the Olympics. But I wonder if you can talk about Colin Kaepernick in particular. Just how was that similar to the Olympic boycott, and how was it different?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that this is a 156-year-old story. This goes back to just after the Civil War, and an individual by the name of Octavius Cato, who was a baseball player who ultimately tried to desegregate baseball in the post-Civil War years, which put him on the front pages of all kinds of newspapers and everything in Philadelphia. And ultimately, he was mobilizing the vote in 1871 and was murdered on election day in Philadelphia. This goes from that point to Major Taylor, who in the wake of Plessy versus Ferguson, which legitimized segregation, was determined that he was going to be able to be the greatest cyclist, not just in the world, but in his own country, where he couldn't ride in races most of the time because he was Black. And then you have Jack Johnson, you have Jesse Owens and Joe Louis, you have Paul Robeson. Post World War II, of course, you go to Jackie Robinson and right on up through that era. And in the 1960s, we get to Smith and Carlos and Arthur Ashe and Jim Brown and Bill Russell, Kurt Flood, of course, Wilma Rudolph, who nobody wants to talk about her activist career, but she did things in Clarksville, Tennessee that people had never dreamed were possible. Colin Kaepernick comes in on top of that, along with a group of athletes who made a heck of a contribution that's never recognized. Dr. J, Magic Johnson, Charles Barkley, Michael Jordan. I was talking to Dr. J not long ago, and he said, Harry said, I'm Dr. J on the basketball court. When I get off the basketball court, I'm just Julius Erving. He said, I couldn't take all that on. I couldn't do what Smith and Carlos did. And that's when you really begin to realize the tremendous contribution these athletes are making. We talk about Dr. King, we talk about Malcolm X, we talk about Stokely, we talk about Huey Newton and Rap Brown, but they didn't have to get ready to run against the greatest sprinters in the world, along with doing the stuff that they were doing in civil rights. Malcolm X supported Muhammad Ali, but he never had to get in the ring to face Sonny Liston or George Foreman. Dr. King never had to line up and guard Sherry Rice while he's doing other things that he's doing. So when you look at a Colin Kaepernick, who's playing football and standing up, when you look at a Muhammad Ali, who's standing up and getting in the ring and facing Sonny Liston and George Foreman. When you look at Smith and Carlos, who's standing up, but then they're going out and facing the greatest sprinters in the world, you realize that being on both the stage and the platform, that's a tremendous responsibility. But even Julius Erving and that group who decided they couldn't do that made a contribution, because what they did was to legitimize incorporation of these athletes. And so, Michael, when you look at LeBron James, you look at Carmelo Anthony, when you look at CP3, when you look at even the WNBA, they stand on the shoulders, not so much of Bill Russell and Tommie Smith and John Carlos and that group. As active as they are, they're really standing on the shoulders of Julius Erving and Michael Jordan and that group, because they're the ones who gave them the economic power and legitimacy to get a seat at the table, not just be in the room or the face of the franchise. They had a seat at the table. So when they got to Orlando, and after George Floyd was killed, after Breonna Taylor was killed, after Jacob Blake was shot, they said, no, we're not going to do any playoffs until the league comes down with a position on what you're going to do about social justice in American society. And you know what the league said? What do we need to do? That would be something that would be absolutely unthinkable in the 1960s. So that's a direct relationship, a direct outcome of what Dr. J and Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson and Charles Barkley and all these athletes who came along who were not as active as Smith and Carlos. In other words, there's no orthodoxy in the struggle. Yeah. You have to be flexible. You have to understand the dynamics of what's going on.
And from my perspective, I mean, part of the reason they were so empowered was because of your intellectual analysis of what the situation was, and your ability to articulate that too. I mean, one of the things that strikes me so much in reading that autobiography, it's just how you deal with just, first of all, the poverty that you describe in the early chapters. But just the disappointment. I mean, I think of you being like the co-captain of the track team and talking to your track coach, and then kind of defending your fellow student, just saying, "Hey, listen, we just got to get this guy's shoes." I mean, you may not like how fast he runs, but everybody on the team has to have shoes, and leading to kind of like a difference in opinion that ends your track career forever.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, how do you deal with the disappointment, and how do you help people who are just kind of cut off at the knees? It made me so sad. This is because there's so many bad things that happened in the story, but when you said, "I never threw the discus again," I mean, that just, I was heartbroken to read that.
Well, as a 17-year-old, I was throwing 175 feet. I mean, I said it came out in one semester at Fresno City College and threw a set a national discus record. The first time I threw the discus in practice, the coach said, "Hey, you know what? That's further than the community college national discus record." I said, "Oh, okay, then I'll come out and throw the discus." But I wound up in junior college principally because I couldn't qualify academically for any of the four-year schools that I wanted to go to. So when I was captain of the track team, because my first semester as a freshman, as an 18-year-old, I set a new school record, was throwing pretty close to 180 feet. The world record at that time was 193. And I knew I could throw further than 193 feet with the discus. I figured I could do that by the time I was 19 years old. Yeah. But of course, it came down to the issue of equity and fair treatment of Black athletes at San Jose State, Negro athletes at that time, and the coach and I had a disagreement. So at the end of I guess he really didn't have any choice, because I went in to talk to him, and after I walked through the door, I turned around and locked it. So he took that, he took that personally. Yeah.
But what one of the things I learned from you is just like, you're so you have such a philosophical attitude about the sports. You know what I mean? It's just like, and it's something that people really care about. And it's important for people to hear your message. That it's not the end of the world. It's not everything. And yet at the same time, it's just, it's marvelous to me that you're able to just kind of carry it lightly, to recognize the way it's powerful and important, but to also know that, especially you're just like your message to young athletes about, how hard it is to be a Dr. J or to be a Bill Russell. That's an important message for people to hear even today, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And you want young people to learn to dream with their eyes open. You don't want to disperse them of their hopes and their dreams, but they have to learn to dream with their eyes open. And that means that you can be everything that you want to be. I came in to San Jose State as a 17-year-old freshman athlete. My dream was to play in the NBA and be on NFL and AFL draft boards and so forth. At the end of it, I was all of that, but I was also an Ivy League fellowship award grad student, where I was accepted at Cornell and at Harvard and a number of other schools, and that made it crystal clear, something that I had believed from the outset, that we have an obligation to be everything that we can be and be the very best at it. And so while I was on the draft board of the Minnesota Vikings, I was on the draft board of the San Diego Chargers, I was scouted by the NBA in basketball. I chose to go to Cornell and get a PhD. And I was glad that I had those options. And so what I try to tell young people is, don't give up your dreams, but learn to dream with your eyes open. Yeah. Be everything you can be, because you never know what ticket they're going to be looking for, what ticket they're going to be punching when the train comes.
Yeah. Well, one of the most powerful stories from me from that time was you as a doctoral student at Cornell and going into New York City and hearing Malcolm X lecture talk. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was in that section where you come back on the after he'd been assassinated to hear the white students cheering. That was just so demoralizing. But I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about just Malcolm X, what your relationship was like with him, and maybe just like what we wouldn't know if we just read an autobiography of Malcolm X. Like, what more was there? And then I have a follow-up question after that.
Well, I didn't really have a relationship with Malcolm X. I got to interview some people in his congregation in New York because I was writing my master's thesis on the
Yes.
Black Muslim family. I
Right.
had a relationship with Louis Lomax, who had
Yes.
worked very closely with Malcolm X, and who, when I went to New York to do research for my master's thesis, I said the magic word, Louis Lomax. He said, "Oh yeah, okay, you're good." You know, because at the time, Malcolm was a pariah. He was outside of the Nation of Islam. He was outside of the mainstream civil rights movement. He was outside of the popular mass movements for sit-ins and so forth, because that had not been part of his agenda before he left the Nation of Islam. And he really didn't have a lot of time to build this new direction toward collaborative efforts at achieving human rights. And so I got to speak to him very briefly. Somebody took a picture years ago and sent it to me, maybe 12, 15 years ago. They found it in their daddy's attic or something among his, they sent it to me and said, "Doctor, I figured that you might want to have this." I did see Malcolm again after I had talked to him in New York City very briefly to get permission really to talk to some of the people in this congregation when he came on February the 16th, 1965 to Rochester, New York, which is only about 60 miles from Ithaca. So I drove over and listened to him speak there. He was probably the most charismatic individual that I'd ever heard speak. And I had heard Dr. King speak. I had heard Louis Lomax, who was a brilliant speaker, James Baldwin, who was also a brilliant speaker. All these people I got to know through Lomax and through Maya Angelou, who wrote the foreword to my autobiography.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And so Malcolm had a particular impact on young people. He was really the godfather, if you will, of the Black Power movement and the new youth militancy movement that the Black Panthers reflected, that H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael reflected, that I reflected in terms of the Olympic Project for Human Rights, because that was always Malcolm's emphasis. And so I was very, very deeply impacted by Malcolm X, and I was outraged when I heard the cheer go up downstairs in Cascadilla Hall. And I thought that maybe they, the New York Giants had maybe fired Allie Sherman from the New York Giants coaching job or something like that, because everybody was calling for his head. And then I found out that they were cheering because Malcolm X had been assassinated. I was so angry. I really never did have very much to say to anybody else in that dormitory as long as I was there. And I was there for 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, that was horrifying for me. One of the things I loved, though, when you talk about Louis Lomax was, I mean, he talked to you about just like what your style was going to be, and I thought that was so interesting too. Just like, are you going to be wearing like the tightly tailored suit, or are you going to be doing something different? And it's like, as an 18-year-old, when I met you, it didn't even occur to me that you had thought about what your personal style was going to be, because you knew you were communicating a message, and how you decided on that. But Malcolm X, I wonder too, you stand up in front of groups of people so often, and what you learn from him in terms of just like as a speaker, as somebody addressing groups.
To tell the truth, to be articulate, to make sure that the points that you're making are on point in terms of the people that you're speaking to and that you're speaking about. I learned so much about lecturing and speaking. I mean, I've given over 1,300 lectures in this country and other places in the world, from China to the Soviet Union to Europe, and all over the world. And a lot of that style came from listening to James Baldwin, listening to Malcolm X, listening to Louis Lomax and Dr. King and so many others, Angela Davis. I mean, I was absorbing stuff like a sponge. The change in dress came about because it was very, very clear that, I mean, I would go out and speak about sports, and which people believe was the tar department of human affairs anyway. And I'm telling them, no, this is a critical realm of human behavior and interaction. And it's important that we come to command it in the civil rights movement because of the platform that it affords us. And I could, you get 6 or 7 reporters show up, but as soon as I put on those dark glasses, 6'8", 260 pounds, Ivy League educated, articulate, angry, and so forth. Next time I held a press conference, there were so many microphones up on a podium, I didn't have any place to set my water down. So at the end of it, what Lomax said is that you have got to be able to get your message out. What they think about you is not important. The message that you get out is important. And what that means is they don't need another guy with a suit on. These young people aren't interested in anybody else in a tie. They're interested in somebody who has the audacity, who has the mindset to stand up and say, this is who I am. Yeah. This is what I have to say. Take it or leave it, but you're here to hear it. And so we discussed that, and like I said, it was by design.
Yeah, and I love that because I just everything about you is just carefully thought out. I mean, even your autobiography, there's no fat in it. It's all like relevant to the purpose for which it's designed. I love that. Reading about the fort in your autobiography, it was so powerful, and just like what life was like in East St. Louis was so powerful. And I wonder, just as everything was happening in the wake of the shooting of Michael Brown, I wonder just that insight from having grown up so near there, just if that made it look different to you, like, because Ferguson for me is just, it's a name of a place, but I don't know it from any other place, but that place. And I wonder if that changed your experience of Michael Brown's shooting and what happened in the aftermath of that.
Well, I grew up in East St. Louis, and my family broke up very early. I was 9 years old when my mother left, and as I finally got a chance to tell both her and my father, I was not surprised that they broke up. I was surprised that they stayed together long enough to have 8 children. I was 9 years old when she left, and by that time, my father was working 2 jobs, so we essentially raised ourselves. And one of the things that we had to deal with was the violence. In so many Black communities at that time. Police violence against Blacks, Black violence against each other was something that we had to live with. Police shooting Black men to death was not anything that was rare or something that we had not become understanding of. We didn't become accustomed to it, but we were not surprised by it. And so the kind of thing that happened with Mike Brown was usual. I mean, I grew up where there would be a body in the alley. I mean, and because nobody cared, did nobody come out there? We didn't have garbage, so it just laid there. Until somebody finally said, hey, we got a problem out here, and they would send somebody out to remove it. But I that's what I grew up with. East St. Louis was one of the toughest cities in the country, and still, you have 19. You're 19 times more likely to be murdered in East St. Louis than any other city in the country. So at the end of the day, that was something that we were aware of, that I grew up with. But the one thing that East St. Louis did for me, when I left there as a 17-year-old, coming to California with the idea of ultimately playing football, making it to the NFL, I realized that there was very little that the world could do to me because of what I'd already gone through in East St. Louis. We used to call the place we lived the fort because you had to take a stand, because if you didn't, you will get wiped out. So that was my background. So by the time I was 18 years old, people would tell me, "Oh, you can't do this." Man, come on, get out of here. What are you talking about?
When I was reading the sections of the book, I was dreaming about it every night. And I was just, my overall impression was like, why didn't I ever wonder when I was 18 years old and met you, why didn't I wonder where you'd come from? I mean, I just felt like I was so not curious. But one of the things you described just about growing up then is that just, you guys didn't have television. And so there was a way in which that was your world.
No.
And then, television kind of was developed. And I wonder if you can talk about just, I mean, you've made such great and effective use of television, when you were at San Jose State, through the Olympic protests, onward. So that was a huge technological change, which you did a great job of figuring out how to, like you said, you knew how to like increase the number of reporters that who were interested in coming to interview you. But now we're having these other technologies that are changing, like social media and electronic communications. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, just in the same way, maybe you can talk a little bit about what television made possible for your work on behalf of human dignity, and then what social media and all those things make possible now.
Well, television brought to the entire country, the entire world, really, what Black people had been experiencing since the end of, since emancipation in this country. The violence, the dogs, the police brutality, and so forth. It also brought to the fore the fact that the government was apparently impotent to prosecute and judiciously deal with the suffering and violence that was inflicted upon Black people. Television brought that to the fore. I don't care whether you're talking about the Selma, or whether you're talking about the 3 civil rights workers who died in Philadelphia, Mississippi, or whether you're talking about the assassination of Medgar Evers, or whether you're talking about the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church that killed 4 little girls. Whatever you're talking about, television brought it into the living rooms of America and the world. Today, you have the social media. The distinction to be made, I would put it like this. In 1968, if I wanted to begin to recruit and disseminate a particular program or protest, I had a rotary phone. And if I sat there and dialed 100 people, since there was no such thing as an answering service, I had to hope that I would be there when at least 50 of them called back. And of that 50, maybe 20 of them would think I wasn't totally insane. And maybe 5 of them would say, yeah, let's sit down and talk about this. Today, all you have to do is decide upon what direction you're going to move in, put it in an Instagram, or put it in a Twitter account, or put it up on Facebook, and hit the single most powerful 4-letter word in the history of human language, which is SEND. And so, you look at somebody like Steph Curry, who picked up the paper and saw where the CEO of Under Armour had said, hey, Trump is an asset. Steph gets on the phone. He has a $90 million contract at the time with Under Armour. He gets on the phone and says, I don't understand that. You take off the ET, maybe I'm in agreement with you. Maybe I understand what you're talking about. That next day, the CEO and owner of Under Armour took out a full-page ad in the Baltimore newspaper saying, I was misquoted. Now, he was the one that was making the statement. That's like Charles Barkley in his autobiography. Somebody asked him about something. He said, I was misquoted. So at the end of the day, he knew that Steph gets on online, goes into social media and say, hey, I'm disassociating from Under Armour. He sold his last T-shirt. So at the end of the day, that is a powerful instrument for this generation. Without the social media, right, Colin Kaepernick is still sitting on a cooler. Yeah. Because when he was sitting, somebody saw him sitting and came and said, a former Navy SEAL, Army Green Beret or something came and said, hey, you know what? Take a knee. At least you're not sitting down. Take a knee. Well, there was nothing new in that, because Black people have been taking a knee in this society since slavery, because oftentimes their circumstances left them no place else to go. But at the end of the day, it went viral. A quarterback in the NFL not standing for the national anthem, and at that point, everybody's involved. And then when he does step forward and take a knee, that really went viral. And that was the difference between other protests that I had seen leading up to that point and what Cap did.
Yeah. And, reading your book just about the incredible response, opposition that you faced. I mean, it's just like, it's sports, art, and games. You say that somewhere in here. You said that to me. You said that as our teacher. The opposition that you faced then made me a little bit less surprised about like the president of the United States weighing in on this. But I was still just horrified just that, he was treated so badly. Anyway,
that's traditional.
Yeah,
Ronald Reagan weighed in on. Yeah, Ronald Reagan weighed in on the situation at San Jose State.
Yeah.
You had the president weighing in on Jack Johnson back in the day when he was fighting boxing for the heavyweight championship of the world against Jim Jeffries. Don't show the film because it'll incite the riots, and we need to quit. Ban boxing. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt and everybody else. So this has always been the case. It always will be the case.
It was the case when Ronald Reagan weighed in on your tenure. I mean, so Ronald Reagan, the governor of the state of California. I mean, can you imagine? I still I can't imagine. Just having know about tenure review and having been close to all that, I just cannot imagine like you said, it's like the pressure of being the athlete and then having this role in trying to advance society. I mean, having the governor of the state weighing in and writing letters to the chancellor of the university when you're trying to get tenure. I mean, that's just more examples. I mean, I wonder, one of the things I kept thinking as I read the FBI files was, when you, through the Freedom of Information Act, you received that material from the FBI files. I mean, I wonder, was there anything that surprised you or what stood out for you when you read your own file from the government?
Well, I was surprised at the number of pages, but the number of pages were made up because they had my dissertation, which is the longest dissertation in Cornell University history, 1,104 pages. J. Edgar Hoover had instructed an agent to go in and discreetly purchase a copy of The Revolt of the Black Athlete. If he had just called me, I would have sent him an autographed copy myself. That was another 200 and some pages. And then they had people who were enrolling in my classes, both at San Jose State and at Berkeley, who were turning in class notes and so forth. So a lot of it were the equivalent of cliff notes from my classes. And then they, of course, the speeches and things that I gave abroad. But there were also about 350 pages of dispatches from the field. Surveillance, and these were dispatches that went to all kinds of agencies, so military intelligence, Army, Navy, military intelligence, the State Department, the White House, also to, of course, the CIA and the FBI in San Francisco. So as I looked at that, I really came to appreciate J. Edgar Hoover. He's the greatest biographer that anybody could ever hope for.
Well, I mean, I just even the sections where you're just kind of like doing a head fake on them. You're like, tell people in my next meeting in Cincinnati, or not Cincinnati, but I know how. I mean,
Detroit. Yeah.
I mean, and you were right. I mean, you weren't being paranoid to think that they were following your moves and that they were anticipating your arrival, looking for you at the train station, the airport, the bus station, etc.
Yeah. Yep. Just because you're paranoid don't mean you're wrong. So what I lived through in the 1960s, really well into the 1970s, was not atypical for activists in this country who really truly believe in that mandate to we the people to form that more perfect union. And it's not something that happens without cost. And to have a file that thick, to have that kind of surveillance, to have people enrolled in your classes that are agents looking to find anything, any reason at all that they can clamp down on you. It's an additional realm of pressure. It's like what Dr. J was talking about. He had a choice. Say, I can't take all that on. Well, I decided to take all that on,
Yeah.
along with teaching and the tenure and the writing and the lecturing and all the rest, to deal with the pressure also of being an activist. And I have no regrets about that.
Yeah, all week I've been thinking about that. Just like when I go into a situation, I don't have to be cautious. I don't have to hold stuff back in the way that you would completely have to, because everybody's after you. You know, you were the first person I ever heard talk about paying college athletes. I never heard anyone talk about that. And it was 20 years later that I started hearing more about that. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just that important idea that college athletes bring so much into the university in terms of money and TV contracts, and yet can be like living in poverty as they're doing that.
Absolutely. Athletes on scholarship, and many of them were not on scholarship. They were on Pell Grants. One of the things that brought an increase in the number of African-American students and other minority students to traditionally predominantly white college campuses and universities was the 1965 Pell Grant Act, where they got money as a result of enrolling at-risk and otherwise economically threatened students. And so the numbers of Black students increased. A lot of the athletes who were brought on campus, and to this day, that's the case. There are Power 5 conference schools where a third of the football players who think they're on scholarship are actually on Pell Grants. Mm-hmm. So those athletes were living at that time right at the poverty line. They could not live at the level of the average student on their campus. They were living but somewhere between $2,500 and $3,500 less than the average student on campus. You see them walking around in these this athletic department gear with thing of property of the athletic department. I told student athletes back in the 1960s, that doesn't refer to the gear. That refers to you. You know, you've been commodified. You are the property of the athletic department, and you should be paid. You're paying the coach's salary. You're paying the AD's salary. You're bringing in hundreds of thousands of dollars at that time into the athletic department. Now it's tens of millions of dollars. And so since 1968, have been saying that athletes at the collegiate level should be paid. The only amateurs who think that collegiate athletes and revenue producing sports are amateurs are the ones who think that. The athletes are functioning as commodified producers that are the property of the athletic departments that are not even in some instances giving them athletic scholarships. They're in school on Pell Grants. What the athletic department did was to get them past the academic requirements to get in school, but once they're in, they're on Pell Grants in many instances. So I started talking about paying athletes 50 years ago. And it turns out that one of my former students at Berkeley, Nancy Skinner, who turned out to be a state senator, organized a group of people in the California state legislature, brought in LeBron James, brought in a number of other athletes, and they literally got a legislative bill passed, which made it legitimate for athletes in collegiate sports in California to be paid, to take advantage of marketing, their likeness, images, and so forth. And so that meant that every other state now has to do that. Otherwise, every athlete's going to be coming to California. You know, they come to California to participate in junior college before they go to some Power 5 school because they were going to have an opportunity to benefit economically. So that changed that whole thing. But again, that goes back to a young lady who was sitting in one of my classes who said, you know what, that makes sense. And when she became a senator in the state of California, she pushed that through.
I'm so ignorant too. It just didn't even occur to me that once California does it, of course, you know, you're going to want to go to UCLA and not University of Wisconsin or, you know, University of Sanford rather than University of Texas. It just didn't even occur to me just because of the state, it's going to have that much broader effect. You know, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that you mentioned this earlier in our conversation, but that research that you did on the Black family for your master's thesis, I wonder, like, what effect it had just on you in terms of how you were as a parent, how you were as a father.
Well, I've been, I was lucky. I married above my
I know.
my status.
That story made me. That was a happy.
She
I
has
was so happy to read
managed,
that chapter.
she has managed to keep this thing together for 54 years because I've given her ample reason. I mean, just the time that I've been gone to say, you know what, it's time for this one. This one's over. You can stick a knife in this one. It's done. The Black Muslim family turns out to be more conservative, more middle class oriented than the comparable socioeconomic class families from traditional Black community environments. They were business oriented, they were frugal, they were all of these things that America puts forth as these are family values. That's what I found the Black Muslim family to be in 1966. And so as I looked at that, it became clear to me that it's not just conditions that generate the problems that we have so often with African-American and other poor families. It's the mindset and the attitude and the disposition that one takes toward those conditions. And that really kind of set a tone for me in terms of, okay, in sickness and in health, till death does do us part, okay, that's an attitude issue. That's an issue of values and sentiments. It's not an issue of conditions. And you may not be able to control everything that comes your way, but what you can always control is how you manage it. And that was that's some of the things that I got from Malcolm X and from that whole experience of researching that Black Muslim family master's thesis.
And what I got from reading it is just like the diversity, the religious diversity of America, especially having the Black Muslim community, just how much, what a strength that is, that we're not all just the same. We're all not listening to the same music, doing the same things. Just, it's a blessing to have different kinds of religious groups in America. And that's my overall take from that, for sure.
Absolutely. I stated earlier that I found out early on that orthodoxy was the enemy of struggle.
Yeah.
Orthodoxy is the enemy of progress and advancement.
Yeah.
Orthodoxy in nature would mean that everything would look alike, eat the same thing, live the same, in the same. I mean, it's the diversity that is the life of this planet. And when we begin to destroy the diversity, whether it's through climate change or whatever, we begin essentially to destroy the planet. It's the same with almost every arena of life. It is diversity that gives us a chance to get this thing right. And whether, again, religion is as important as science. People worry about science replacing religion. Hey, you know what? In some particular instance, it might displace it, but it's never going to replace it, because as I stated, there are just too many things that this planet and this world bring to the human experience, which leaves them oftentimes nowhere to go but to their faith. They have to get up in the morning and believe it, that I'm going to make it better today. It's not luck. Luck is something that you wait on to happen to you. You hope you get lucky and win the lottery. Faith is something that you get up believing that you can make happen. And that is so critical to everything. It was an act of faith to put men on the moon. They didn't even know if they could get them back, but they knew one thing: we got a chance to get them back, and they had that faith. So you can't separate those two things out. And the minute you find one without the other, you got a problem. You find people who don't believe in science, they don't wear masks, they don't get vaccinated, they don't. You find people who are so critical of anything having to do with faith. The next thing you know, they're not coming out the house because things have got to be that rough. You got to get up in the morning and put the shoes on, even though you know, like I said, one day the coroner gonna take them off of you. But through faith, you say, but not today. I'm getting out there today, and we're gonna get this done.
So I don't have a Professor Edwards in my life anymore. And it's so disappointing. But instead, I've got two replacements, my own children, who are constantly raising my consciousness because things are changing. And you don't have this experience so much because you have young people around you, just working with athletes and, working in college world. But one of the things they've taught me about is what they call it the man box. It's just like the way my own perception of masculinity can sometimes create a kind of barrier for me being a complete and full person. And as I read your book, you talk about the manhood hustle. And that's what it sounds like. When they talk about man box for me, they talk about the manhood hustle. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that too. What is the manhood hustle, and how do you see it still at work and changing over time?
Well, so let me go to something else. This has so much to do with men defining themselves in terms of their domination of women.
Yeah.
This has so much to do with their feeling of relative perceived women are not going anywhere. That women do. The first step in getting rid of the manhood, all the rest of it, is understanding that we're not going anywhere that women don't go. As full, equal, respected partners and leaders in many instances, because of what we men have done to this earth, to this society, to this world. We can't be everything we can be. As human beings, forget the masculinity part. We cannot be everything that we can be until women can be everything that they should be, because the only way we can keep women in a hole, so we'll look big and tall, is to stay right there in that hole with them. And so at the end of the day, you can be a complete swinus americanus, a chauvinistic pig, and realize, you know what? I got to get over this masculinity thing. I've got to start looking at women as equal, as respected partners, and looking to them for intuitions, ideas, outlooks, and so forth that can help us to keep this thing together that we call America, that we call the civilized world. And so the masculine hustle, overpowering, brutal, insensitive, I don't care, I'm going to do it my way, power, violence. Hey, you know what? Those days are gone. That's a suicide pact.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the books that I read when I was a boy was Malcolm X's autobiography, but I also read Bill Russell's Go Up for Glory. Have you ever heard of that book? It's
yeah. Oh, yeah. I got an autographed copy right over there on the shelf.
I've never met anybody who's read it, but I mean, you read the book when a certain time of your life and it has this huge, deep effect on you. And I wonder if there's some books that you reflect on that had a similar effect on you, and just you read them at the right moment and they're still with you.
Bill Russell's Go Up for Glory and Second Wind, both his books.
Second Wind exactly is the second one.
Yeah, he's the most intelligent. One of the most intelligent people, forget the athlete thing, one of the most intelligent people that I have ever had the pleasure of working with. I remember when I was at Cornell University, I asked the head of my committee, because I was the first Black person in the sociology department in the PhD program in 15 years, and the other guy left with the master's degree. He couldn't take it anymore. Yeah. I asked him, I asked the chairman of my committee if Bill Russell and Malcolm X would qualify to be graduate students, PhD candidates at Cornell. Mm-hmm. And his response was, they could teach here. So to me, that's when I began to trust my committee. Mm-hmm. That's when I began to trust this individual. Bill Russell is one of the most intelligent men that I have ever met in my life. I remember when a reporter stuck a microphone in his face and asked him, this thing in Mexico City, I mean, you look at Smith and Carlos, Edward, you look at those guys, I mean, do you agree with that? Do you have a problem with what they did, what Edwards was talking about, what Smith and Carlos did? Russell was in the locker room and at the Boston Celtics, and he sat there for a moment, and then he looked up, he said, yeah, I have a huge problem with it. And the reporter stuck there, what was it? Because he wanted to trash these young Black athletes. You know, what was it? Russ said, I didn't think of it first. So he was just a brilliant guy. So both his books, James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time. Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings.
Yeah.
I mean, when I go back and read those books a second time, but more important than that, read the notes that I made in them. What surprises me is that I had the insight that I had at that time into what they were trying to say.
Yeah.
It still reverberates. What they were trying to say still reverberates with me. But Bill Russell is a classic, and I hope that everybody appreciate him for what he is. He's one of the greatest athletes, most certainly, the most winning athlete in the history of this country, one of the greatest athletes in the history of this country, and one of the most intelligent men that I have ever encountered.
Yeah, and it's just right. I mean, the thing that stuck out for me, one of the things I remember so strongly is him never going from Oakland to San Francisco until he went to college at USF. I mean, just
right across the bridge.
Right across the bridge. Never went. Never had the chance to go, and yet still had such a worldwide consciousness, even though he came from such a circumscribed kind of location. You know, one of the things, just, you know, reading the autobiography, I mean, obviously, I want to know what happened to Lois. I want to have all your siblings. But I also wonder just, you know, how much your mind has changed on things. I mean, you were 35 when you wrote the book. You're probably 45 you're probably 30. You're probably 42 or something when we met. But how much has your mind? What has your mind changed the most about since writing your autobiography?
How have I changed?
Yeah, have you changed your mind on things? Because in a way, reading it, I'm just like, yeah, that's the same man I knew then, and I'm listening to you now. It's the same man I know now. It's just like,
well, my former students tell me I haven't changed physically. I'm approaching 80 years old, but they say you haven't changed physically. You still sound the same. Well, I have to keep reminding them that. Beauty breaks, pretty ages, but ugly as forever. It's the same. Me and Herman Munster will look the same when we turn 90. You know, I have to remind folks of that. But look, everybody changes.
Yeah.
Dr. King changed.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
He and Malcolm were standing back to back.
Yeah.
Malcolm X changed.
Yeah, so much.
Everybody that I know changed.
Yeah.
And if they didn't change, then something was wrong.
Yeah.
So have I changed in some fundamental ways? I mean, I did not expect to live to be 30.
Yeah, you say that in the book too. You say that in the book
so many people around me were being shot down.
Yeah. Yeah.
I came up out of some dead folks in the alley in East St. Louis. Then come here, I see Malcolm X down, Dr. King, members of the Black Panther Party, and so forth. And so I didn't expect to live to be 30. To be sitting around here over 50 years later, have I changed? You better believe it. And I got not only to see my 3 great kids grow up, a corporate lawyer, a doctor, and a computer software specialist, but I got to see some grandchildren and realize why grandparents are always ready to show you the picture of their grandkids, because you love your children unconditionally, but you fall in love with your grandchildren. And I've fallen in love with my two grandsons, and every time I see their face, it just lights me up. So have I changed? Absolutely. Have I changed in terms of fundamental principles, values, beliefs, and so forth? Not really.
Yeah, that's exactly what my take on reading the book. You should look back at it again, and you should write the next section. Basically, you really should. I mean, I'm sure people tell you that all the time, but so there's so many questions I have for you, because when we were in class, you talked about the Black Panther movement, you talked about Angela Davis, you talked about so many people I want to know more about, and I feel badly, but we've completely run out of time. So I only have time for one more question. The question is this: is like, if you were giving one last lecture for all of us, all your students, around the world. Some of us are in high offices and getting legislation passed, and some of us never made much of themselves. Like, what would that lecture look like for your one last lecture if you had one more chance?
I'm shooting a series right now called The Last Lectures. And it's my last statement and testament on developments at the interface of sport and society, but also on American society more generally.
Yeah.
And what it's essentially built around is this question that people have asked me over the years. What is the greatest slogan coming out of the 1960s? Was it "We shall overcome"? Was it no justice, no peace"? Was it Black power? What was it? No, it was "Keep the faith." Because without that, you have absolutely no vision of what it is that you're struggling for. And when we lose faith in the institutions of this society, when we lose faith in ourselves to make positive and constructive changes, when we lose faith in that capacity to reach out beyond the barricades to each other and sit down and talk about creating and achieving this idea called America, we're finished. Not because of external invasion, but because of internal collapse. And so the greatest thing that I hope to contribute in this 7-part series of lectures is to provide a solid ground based upon the historical evolution of the dynamics and substance of change in American society at the interface of sport and society, a basis for people to look up and say, this struggle has to go on. But first of all, we as a people and we as a nation have to keep the faith.
Yeah. And I just have to thank you. You helped so many of my friends when we were in college, and they knew they could come to you and talk to you, and you had a huge influence on what I ended up doing. There's a lot of things I could have been and done, but your inspiration is part of the reason why I got ordained and did all this. So I'm very grateful for this time together, and just like a lot of your students, we're carrying your little voice in our back of our heads wherever we go in the world. You have that voice still with us.
Thank you so much. You're in the same profession. You're in the same profession I am. You're a teacher, just like I'm a preacher. I just do it from a podium in a classroom. You do it. You do it in the church, but we're all in the same business. Keep the faith.
Yeah, keep the faith.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And please join me next week when our guest will be Atsuro Riley, an award-winning poet and author of the new collection Herd Horde. And we rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. You can give to gracecathedral.org or by texting THINK, THINK, to 76278. And Dr. Edwards, I hope I see you again on this mortal coil. I'm so glad that you're recording these lectures. I can't wait to see what your final lecture is. All of us, your students, we thank you for what you've given us. All right.
Thank you very much. And let's do this again sometime. It's been a privilege.
A blessing for me. We'll do it again.